Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 12 of Mix It Up with ML, episode 2 of season 2. And I'm super excited today to have a good friend of mine, Rohan Shah, here on the podcast. Rohan is a molecular biology major at Princeton, or was graduated from Princeton, and is now manager of corporate business operations at Loxo Oncology. Got that straight from the LinkedIn, brother. Hope I got it right.
You got it right.
And I'm super pumped to talk with Rohan about all things, intersections of entrepreneurship and medicine and biotech and all that really cool stuff that Rohan's into that I'm excited to learn about. So, and whatever else the podcast takes us to, let's do it, brother.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, man. I've been listening to this for quite a while, and I think it's just a wonderful podcast. It's so different than some of the other ones, and just honored to be on the podcast, man.
Bro, appreciate the kind words. That's what keeps me going, man. So, yeah, man. As we were talking about before the pod, we'll start off with just a little, introduction to the listeners of how we met, so they have some context and for the conversation.
Yeah, I kind of distinctively remember when we met because you're very tall. So I just kind of remembered, okay, there was somebody who was way taller than me at this thing, but I think it was one of the Butler study breaks. So you and I were both in Butler College, one of the residential colleges at Princeton.
Right.
Framing that for the audience.
Good. Excellent.
And I know they would do these study breaks every Thursday, right, at like 9 or 10 o'clock, once people as like a study break from studying the entire week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I lived in class of 1967 hall, and so it was just right downstairs from me. And so I would go sometimes just on my own, like not with my roommates, not with anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would know it precisely when you guys would roll in. And it was the whole monastery boys all rolling in at once. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, this is college. Like, this is like the type of, like, this is college here. And you guys look like you're having so much fun. People are riffing on one another, doing all that. And I was like, wait, I remember being envious. I was like, wow, these people really have it, have like a good gang already starting. This might've been October of freshman year.
Right, yes.
2016.
Yes.
And my roommates and I were close, but we were never that close. There was some divergence. Mm-hmm. My theory has always been that the nicer your dorm is, your roommates are not as close. So the worse your dorm is, definitely the better, the closer you guys are.
Bro, and you jumped right on it. Go ahead. Yeah, go right ahead.
And I heard all the stories about the monastery, and I was like, now I get it. Yeah, one urinal, one shower, like whatever. And so I remember meeting you there, and everybody else, like Hallmark and Kenan and Jack and everybody. And I was like, wow, these are the guys. And you guys have remained close, like for 4 years, and it's mind-boggling to me. It's awesome.
Bro, the bondage of suffering. I was just going to say, like, for the listeners, Rohan was blessed with this beautiful Butler dorm, AC, hardwood floors, these beautiful things. And my friends and I were in this hall, 1915 hall, called it the monastery because it was all men, just like 36 dudes in this like centuries old building. It felt like, so that suffering definitely bonded us, bro. But study breaks, man, we'd go in there, we'd pound down some pizza, 10 p.m. at night, super unhealthy, but we were all in there having a good time, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I was like, I got to get here before them, because once they roll through, the pizza's gone. And there's not getting any of that back. So, and then we became close over time, like a lot of the same classes. And then obviously in Cap and Gown, the eating club we were in, we all had a good time. So I feel like I've just known you for a long time, actually, since freshman year. It's crazy.
Absolutely, bro. And I love this section because I sometimes forget sort of how we met too. So, the Butler College start. Absolutely.
Butler College start. Yep.
Yes, sir. So you touched on it, brother. We were in a lot of the same classes, right? Yeah. And I think, I remember us getting closer through that. And so for the listeners, that was pre-med classes, brutal, another bondage to suffering, right?
No.
The listeners, don't do it. Don't do it. No, I'm kidding. But basically, I guess the way I wanted to start off the pod was I've always felt Rohan was such an interesting pre-med because I knew you always had these interests in, the business side of medicine and entrepreneurship. And we'll get into that and sort of like how you've manifested those interests. And that's not very common in our pre-med community. I think a lot of us are all very much like just do the orgo, do the P sets, and just kind of get out of there. And I've always felt like you had all these other interests, which is really cool. And another reason I wanted you to come on. And so my question would be sort of, have you always been interested in this business entrepreneurship side of healthcare and medicine? And if so, sort of when did that start? And I just kind of love to hear a little bit about that journey, and we can kind of tease apart, what about it makes you so passionate?
Yeah. Thank you for asking the question. I mean, this is a question that is like very core to my being, and who I am today. So
let's get deep, Rohan.
Yeah, and I've had to say something like this maybe on the order of like 50 to 60 times through work when I like meet people. And so, but I love sharing the story because I think it colors a lot of like who I am today and what I plan to do in the future and where I'm at now. But I got interested in science probably in early middle school. And I got interested because of a familial connection with cancer. So I've had 2 cousins who passed away from a genetic form of acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is a highly aggressive leukemia that, my first cousin passed away at 27 and the other one at 23. So just to see that and the kind of wreckage that it leaves on a family, right? When it's on the same side of the family, I had only 10 cousins on that side of the family, and just it was shocking. It was just purely shocking, and people had no rational explanation for it. Me being a middle schooler, and I didn't really know what to think. I was like, this is insane, right? Especially when you see your aunts and uncles and grandparents and people like that who are into, middle-aged, old age, and they're just like, their kids are just dying at this young age of a horrible, devastating disease. I remember being there when my second cousin, his name was Smith, who passed away. He was treated at MD Anderson, which is the best standard of care, best cancer center in the world, because they knew how devastating this could be. And he got a bone marrow transplant. He had a 14 out of 14 match, and ultimately passed of graft versus host disease, which is when your immune system fights the bone marrow transplant. And I was thinking, like, how is this possible? 1, 2, what is my own genetic risk for something like this? Must be kind of high. And it's something I think about a lot, actually, and still motivates me in my work that I do today. But that got me interested in science.
Right.
And so I became completely enamored by biology, by cancer medicine, like, and at the very fundamental level, not kind of at the more clinical level, more at like, how do cells work? Like, it's just the base. I mean, again, like I was late middle school, early high school, and like trying to just understand what DNA is and like how this stuff works, right? And then what really got me going was I, on a whim, applied to some research experiences in high school, where I would do a summer internship at some sort of university or cancer center. And I wasn't sure if I would ever get that, or, but I'd heard of other friends, people who were older than me, applying to these things and whatnot. So I said, why don't I try? And my first experience that I think has kicked off a lot, and I still bring this up when I talk to people at work, was a summer at a Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City. So they had a program called the Human Oncology Pathogenesis Program Summer Research Experience. And so as a high schooler, you were in a cohort with 20 other people, and each high schooler was in a different lab. So I got selected randomly to be in the lab of this man named Dr. Charles Sawyers. I had no idea who this guy was, and I quickly Googled him after finding out I was in his lab.
Yeah.
And he was on President Obama's cancer task force. He was president of the American Association for Cancer Research.
Okay.
And more importantly, he discovered this concept of targeted therapy, whereby, unlike chemo or radiation or surgery, which are kind of blunt instruments, targeted therapy directly kills cancer cells by exploiting their genetic vulnerabilities that are only native in cancer cells and not in normal cells. And he discovered the first drug that then became approved that has made chronic myeloid leukemia essentially it's a chronic condition. You pop a pill once a day and you're fine.
Right.
And I was like, this is mind bending.
Yeah.
Like people can actually do this.
Yeah.
And so that summer I did a research project. It was interesting, but again, you're in high school, training wheels are on. I'm not curing cancer or anything. Yeah. But what really got to me was the fact that you could take science and create medicine out of it. This was possible. Like, this is not some pipe dream. People actually do this. And that got me completely hooked on science. And that's how the business side also started to weave in, which we can talk about. But that's kind of the genesis of how this all happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love how you drew that distinction between, the targeted therapy and the other ways of cancer. And this is something I really want to ask you a little bit later about. And if you want to get into more of those deep things.
Happy to talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, sick. And so, right, you said, so you're into science now, and then how did that business aspect grow out of that, right? Because from my perspective, I hear, people get really into science and then they sort of spend a lot of their time at the lab bench, and maybe they get a PhD, MD, PhD, and they kind of stay there just like at the lab bench. But what brought you that extra step to this business side of it, right? I'm very interested in that.
Yeah. So I think a major distinction to be made is that academics do the hard work of discovering the science, discovering the biology, the pathogenesis, the clinical need, things like that. They do not develop the medicines that ultimately become marketed, commercialized, and brought to patient.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. That professor I worked for, Dr. Sawyers, although he discovered the biology, he discovered that this was an actionable genetic dependency that I can target with a drug. He did not make the drug. Then they collaborated with Novartis, which is a large pharmaceutical company, who developed the drug start to finish. And they discover, the chemical matter, the exact molecule, how it binds, all of the, and then they take it through clinical trials. They take the risk of putting it in humans and taking it phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then ultimately commercializing and marketing.
Right.
And now, does the academic retain some of the upside? Yes, of course. But a lot of the heavy lifting in getting this medical innovation to patient is taken by the pharmaceutical company or biotech company or whatnot. And so the way I got interested is I realized that for me, the really intriguing part is, how do you extrapolate and take that idea?
Yes.
I don't think I'm the idea generator.
Right.
But I think I can understand how everything grows from there, and how you take the nascent idea and you bring it to patient. That's an art in itself. So in our industry, we call ourselves drug developers. We don't call ourselves scientists, because we're not doing that. Really interestingly to me was that there is this nexus between business and science. And there are few people who live there, in that realm, where both sides of the brain are thinking bidirectionally.
Right.
And if you can think there, that is a really interesting place to live.
Right.
Because you're understanding, okay, I can interpret the science, I know what's going on, I'm constantly like attuned to the science. But then I understand, what is the resources, what are the scale, what is needed to bring it to market.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of value to be had there. So that's how I kind of got interested in that. And I really do think that being in Dr. Sawyer's lab and seeing that from end to end, like
Mm-hmm.
he discovered something and now it's straight up curing thousands of patients every year.
Right.
You understand that this just doesn't happen.
Right.
And I think a lot of people in the United States and around the world don't actually understand that process.
Me included. Me included. Yeah.
But I'll give you a good example, right?
Yeah,
Like you're
please.
looking at the vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna.
This is what I wanted to ask about.
It doesn't say National Health Institute, right? It says Pfizer, Moderna on it. And so what have they done? They have taken the basic science innovation of RNA-based vaccines and have brought that to millions of people around the world.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And people working for Pfizer and Moderna need to understand those principles and those like the scientific mechanism of what's going on with that certain vaccine so that they can build it and replicate it in mass. Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
Correctly?
I mean, these companies are completely staffed by scientists.
Okay.
Like a lot of my job day in and day out is evaluating, understanding, taking action on science.
Right.
Like I am like using my degree constantly because the science is the ultimate value driver and currency of this industry.
Right.
If you do not understand science,
right.
you are essentially like, you're like relegated over there. You're like, okay,
right.
these are the people who know what's going on. These are like the sporting people.
Yeah.
So like,
right.
So, and that's not to be like crass or anything. It's just like, this is a science-based industry. And that's why I wanted to major in molecular biology. That's why I wanted to do the hard science. I spent 4 years of doing lab work, you know, did my senior thesis doing lab work. Like,
for the listeners, that's hardcore stuff.
I don't know. I love science. Like even if I don't go on to get a science degree from here on out, science will always be part of my life. And it's such a value creating thing. Like, you know, so hope I kind of answered your question. I was a little bit circuitous about that one, but
not at all. This is beautiful. And so my next question that sort of flows out of that, right, is like, it sounds to me like that understanding of science is sort of a prerequisite for being in this industry, right? But then how do you yourself, right, and maybe the proverbial you as well, but how do you get those business skills that you also need and those development skills? Where does that come from, right? Because your degree is in science, but how does that business training come in there? I'm just interested in that.
Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing I will say.
Yeah.
This is an incredibly nuanced and idiosyncratic field.
Yeah.
That if you even go and get a, you know, business degree or an MBA or whatever you end up doing, you will still not understand how this field works.
Right.
There are so many nuances and little quirks and things that people who have been in the industry for a while know.
Right.
And so you might be wondering, okay, then how at 23 are you ever going to figure this out? Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've been reading, you know, we have like industry publications and industry like trade news every day that pops up. And I've been reading that for what, 6 years now?
Yeah.
Like just every day you see the headline, okay, this company did this or Pfizer did this. And why did they do that? And how did this company raise money? And oh, who is working there? Oh, I've heard that name before.
Yes.
Or I've seen that drug target before. Or their clinical data was phenomenal. And over time, the synapses in your brain start to connect. You start to understand how everything is working.
Yes.
I would say that was one component of it. A huge component, and of which I still do every day. I wake up, it's the first thing I read, which is kind of weird, but like it just is.
Yeah, you love it
now.
Yes. Yeah.
But then the second one is talking to people. The industry is actually quite small. So to give you like a feel for it, it's maybe 100 times smaller than the general tech industry.
Okay. 100 times. Okay.
Like 100 times smaller.
Got it.
So you can essentially know the heavy hitters. Even if you don't know them personally, you may have heard of them because they just get recycled again and again in the same industry.
Okay.
One company, then they jump somewhere else, whatever.
Right.
And what I found to be incredibly useful was just, and this is something I picked up from my dad after, you know, years of him he's not in medicine or biotech, but he's in finance, and networking is really important there. He said, use your Princeton EDU address while you have it, and
Yeah.
email anybody and everybody you want to talk to, because nobody's assuming that you're trying to get something out of them.
Yes.
You're a student,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would do that, and probably have spoken to well over 100 people in the industry and just gotten their thoughts and understand. And you don't show up to those meetings, you don't take those calls and be like, you prepare for them, because you're
Yeah.
taking somebody else's time who's important and valuable. And I think it's just through that I've started to connect the dots. Yeah, those are two major pillars, I would say.
Right. And I think the first one you highlighted on is something I'm learning this year, and something I think is important is that so much of life and like your professional skill set really is predicated on like learning by doing, right? It's
Yeah.
like the education is sort of that foundation you needed there, as we talked about, right? To consume this science. But then
Yeah.
from there on out, it's like, you're not going to go to MBA school and like
Yeah.
learn XYZ about
Yeah.
like, and you plug and chug of like, okay, I'm a good businessman for the
Yeah.
pharma industry, right? It's like you said,
Yeah.
you really got to churn there and just learn and talk to people. And that's the
Learn, talk to
second
people.
thing.
Yeah.
That's the second thing, bro, that I think I admire about you, is I've always kind of seen that you were like, let me just put myself out there, talk to people. And I've always been like, oh, like I don't want people to think I'm a snake or like trying to get things out of them. But
Yeah.
in reality, it's like people love talking about what they do. And that's like, that connection really drives like beautiful things that can happen. So I also just wanted to touch on that. It stuck out to me.
I
Right.
would say like the Princeton alumni network might be like the best thing I've ever stumbled on in my life.
Or any college, or anybody who's listening who
at
doesn't
any
go to
college.
Princeton.
Yeah.
It's like, talk to the people who went where you went, right? Would you say that?
Talk to those people. If you have an alumni database that you can search, we did, right?
Yes.
I hit biotech, put that in the field, all these names pop up, and you just send emails and say, and I would email people, and some people would say, no, I don't have time to talk to you, or no, I don't have a summer position, or whatever. That's fine.
Yeah.
Even then, when I would get that email, I would still say, hey, do you maybe have 15 minutes to talk?
Right.
I just want to get to know you better, whatever. And that opens the door a little bit, right?
Yeah.
They're kind of trying to shut the door, and you creak it open a little bit.
Right.
And then based on some of those interactions, some of these people have become like lifelong mentors for me.
Which is crazy.
And
yeah.
You just, I get your point about it can come off sometimes like, oh, you're trying to like, like networking is such like a buzzword. Like,
yeah. With a negative connotation
yeah.
too. Right.
I think you just have to be thoughtful about it. You have to care. And when you do talk to people, you have to convey to them that you feel like what they're doing is important and you're there to learn.
Right.
You're not there to like, I want to get something out of you. I'm not trying to hustle you,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to learn something. So yeah, for all the listeners, do that. It'll pay dividends. I promise you.
Absolutely right. And it's all about sort of that intention behind it. It's like you're really genuinely interested in this field and learning from this person.
Yeah.
And that's a different thing than somebody who's just trying to get some leg up or do whatever. Right. So that's a nice little distinction to draw. Love that. So let me get this straight. So you feel like you wanted to be in that development aspect or business side of medicine because you want to, is it because you wanted to sort of bring things out to people at scale and sort of translate things? Like what specifically brought you to that aspect of it as opposed to the bench side? I hope that's not too repetitive of a question that I asked. Do you know what I mean? Like what is it about the one side?
So I mean, I love bench research and whatnot, and I think the clinical stuff is also incredibly interesting. Like what my sister, I told you, is training to be a doctor. We interact with a lot of oncologists. We have a lot of oncologists at our company. But I think what is really uniquely fascinating to me is taking an innovation and bringing that all the way downstream. There was an adage when I started our company. I remember our CEO telling us, he was like, we will run through a wall to get drug to patient. Like I was like, what? And he's like, you should wake up thinking about this, and you should
Yeah.
go to sleep thinking about this. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, this is next level. But like, and that's not to be like other people are not thinking that way, but it's that kind of intensity, like I will make it happen one way or another,
Got it.
is just amazing to me. And I think if that's possible, and I can do that, and I have a unique skill set to do that,
Yes.
then I will do that. Because
Right.
either end of the spectrum, you're capturing maybe a smaller patient population, you're maybe just doing the discovery, whatever. But if you're there in the middle, you're seeing it end to end, and somehow you've figured out how to connect all the dots, that's a powerful place to be. So I'm still getting
Yes.
there. I'm not nearly there, but I hope I can connect the dots eventually. There was another thing that my boss said. He said it's a golden triangle
Okay.
of science, medicine, business. If you can
Mm.
understand all three, you are indestructible in this industry.
Whoa.
And every day I think about that. I'm like, how can I maybe improve one side of this triangle or the other, or I'm improving this side or whatnot.
Mm.
And that's my like aspirational target. Like, can I
Whoa.
get there? Yeah.
Bro, there's so much there that's really interesting, and I want to touch on, many elements of that. I think we will
Yeah.
in this pod as we go. But basically you gave me a beautiful answer there of like what sort of draws you is the start to finish, bringing it, from infant to, I guess whatever
Adults.
metaphor that is. Yeah, corny metaphor, but whatever, right? You love that sort of
Yeah.
journey, and that I think is a beautiful thing that shows me why you're into it, right? That's amazing. And I think that's the entrepreneurial spirit. I feel like I could be wrong, but I think that's the entrepreneurial spirit. And so that brings me like sort of very naturally to, you founded like Olymptos Bioventures,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I want to dive into this because that's really like life science entrepreneurship. And you sort of talked about your background of why you got interested in the life sciences and how that brought you there, right? But could you just talk to the listeners a little bit about this company that you made? And then I have a bunch of sort of like entrepreneurship specific questions about this.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Happy to talk about that. So this was an idea that I've been thinking about for some time throughout college. Never really found the confidence to pull the trigger. And the way, like, I'll frame this kind of this way. So Princeton, unlike our peers, Harvard and Stanford and UPenn, even for that matter, doesn't have the luxury of being in an urban metropolitan area where, especially with Stanford and Harvard, you were literally doors away from some of the most dynamic entrepreneurial communities on the planet.
Yes.
Right. And although New Jersey's surrounded by a lot of, pharma industry, whatnot, it's not in our sleepy suburb.
It's not the same.
So, right. So I had realized that the university is making a push into entrepreneurship, but it was largely focused on tech. It was largely focused on things that they believed undergraduate students could just come up with and more or less build out of a dorm room.
Right.
And that I understand why that position is being advanced by the university, right? This is a university that historically doesn't have roots in entrepreneurship. It's not like Stanford where the water there, has led to Google and everything else, right? But there was a clear mandate from Eisgruber and the board and alumni to make a push in that direction. But we don't have a business school. We don't have a law school.
That's what I was going to say. We
don't have a medical school, right? So what are you going to do? So they pushed much more into tech, and mainly tech that wasn't incredibly deep, like more consumer-based tech, things like that. I realized that the biotech and pharma industry is essentially where the software industry was in the early 2000s. So you're riding the roller coaster is going up, all right? Like this industry is like going like this. And we are not looking at it. Our peers at Harvard and Stanford are immersed and soaking it up, right?
Okay.
So what are we doing? So after doing some internships, I started to realize that there's an opportunity for young people who are historically neglected and shut out of the biotech community
Really?
yeah, and I can talk about that,
Yeah.
to participate and learn the just valuable skills as to how this works.
Right.
But the important distinction that we made was, on one end of the pendulum, we don't want to start an organization that only invites speakers and just kind of like, does whatever and, blah, blah, blah. And you're temporarily inspired for 2 hours. Feel inspired. And then you're like, oh crap, I have a peace out. Like, I'm done now. You know what? And that's the end of it, right?
Love it.
But we didn't want to be on the other side of the pendulum, where you had to actually absorb the risk of starting a biotech company, of which I do not know how to do that in a dorm room. Yeah. You cannot do that in a dorm room. You need lab space, you need equipment, you need research. This is an incredibly resource intense industry. People, when they start companies, raise tens of millions of dollars. The average Series A round in biotech right now is $62 million.
Ooh.
Imagine
Series
that.
A being like the beginning of the company. For the listeners. Yep.
So we then came to this middle ground where we said, why don't we work with professors on campus who are trying to create companies or get their technology out of their labs and commercialize it in some way, and we can help them by doing the due diligence, doing the business planning, doing all the things that they don't want to do.
Okay.
And so that was the first leg of the stool.
Right.
Let's do that. The second leg was, why don't we then also learn from some really great mentors? And so we ended up getting connected to this guy who's on the executive team of Merck, this guy named Andrew Wood, who graciously volunteered his time every 2 weeks to come and help us.
Wow. Yeah.
I'll explain how this all comes together.
Yeah.
The third leg that we were thinking about, and I started this with 2 other guys, Nico Fotopoulos, class of 21, and
great guy.
Avi Bopana, class of 21 too. We're also tremendously bright and very motivated in this field. Was, why don't we, as students, use our, as I said, Princeton.edu email addresses and get this in front of the best investors, industry people that we know that we can reach out to, because we're students and they would love to see what we're working on, and essentially test drive the professor's business model, the business plan, the whatever they want to commercialize in front of these, the avant-garde of the industry.
Okay.
Before these professors even raise a dime of money. Okay. So that was the 3 ways we started thinking about doing this. So Olymptos was never actually a company. We don't have any money. We have raised a lot of money. We've raised almost $60,000. It's all to fund the club operation. We don't invest any of the money into any companies. We don't do anything like that. And it started off small. We were very unproven. We didn't know what we were supposed to do. We showed up. We're like, what are we doing? This guy from Merck graciously came and started helping us, which grew the organization. And then things really took off. And since starting it, 3 years ago now, I'm now no longer part of it, but I'm on the board. Right. They've done 3 projects. We've pitched it to investors in San Francisco, in New York, around the world. Yeah. One of the professors is raising money right now for his company, which is going to be pretty large. The first technology we worked on was spinal cord regeneration. The second one was a novel therapeutic for hepatitis B, which is a major medical problem. The third one that they more recently worked on was a COVID-19 vaccine, which was awesome, super topical. Right. And then the last one that they just have been working on is a gene therapy for certain neurodegenerative diseases. Jeez, man. And all the while, pitching this in front of investors, getting the experience. And ultimately, what I'll tell you is Olymptos is not necessarily about the projects. It's about training the next generation of life science leaders. Right. And so these people will get attuned to this industry, which is on the up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the roller coaster's going. You're on King to Ka. You better like jump on, right?
Scary roller coaster right there. Yeah.
And you'll get attuned to that. You will understand that, and you will take that forward in your industry. And so we've seen people from our organization get jobs based on what the work they did in Olympus. Last year, of the seniors of class of 2021, all 5 of them got jobs in the life science industry.
It's amazing, man.
In a tough economy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, this is actually delivering the value that we had hoped.
Right.
That people are understanding and learning real skills. It's not like some pipe dream. Like, this is real, something you can apply in the future, and they're going to go on and do good things. And so organization has become really legitimate, which I'm very happy about. We have an advisory board. We hold them accountable. The leadership is phenomenal. And I think the school is very bullish on what we can do. So huge part of my Princeton experience right there, though.
Bro, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And again, props to you for seeing a need and trying to address it, right? With the entrepreneurship in the life sciences, specifically at Princeton. And, you know, that's amazing. I really admire that. And so do I have this correct in that I know you said it wasn't really about the projects, which again, I love as well. Yeah. But what you were doing there is, we talked about going from the bench side, from the bench to the patient, right? We need the drug development company to get in there in between. What you were doing was sort of showing these projects that academics at Princeton were working on to investors, and then they would invest in what, like the capacity to then bring that to a Merck or bring that to a pharmaceutical company. Forgive me if I'm not getting it correct.
No, you're hitting the nail on the head here.
Okay.
So we, in the interest of the organization, we do not follow technologies beyond one semester or one calendar academic year. So again, the point of the organization is education. So if we were to take one project and do it for 4 years, right, we would miss the whole component of seeing multiple different technologies, multiple different therapeutic areas and whatnot.
Got it, Roger.
But we do talk to these investors, get them interested. And once they are interested, they will make the overture to the professor and to the university. And by then, our work starts to recede. We say, okay, we've made the relationship. We've shown you the potential of this. Yes. And they will go and run with it. Okay. And so to give you some examples, the HBV company is actually going to turn into a company. And they're going to raise multiple millions of dollars. And there are 3 Olympus people who are part of the organization who are actually going to be working for that company this summer as their summer internship. Right. Like, I was always skeptical, like, is this ever going to really materialize? Like, is this ever going to actually go anywhere? And the first project didn't really, because the professor was like very old and kind of, honestly, he was like on his way out. But we had to start somewhere, and we didn't get the pick of our draw of what type of technology we wanted to work on. Exactly. But since then, the technology has been gangbusters. These people are like, we actually want to start companies. And then they're coming to us and saying, can you work on our technology? We're not even going to them. And I'm like, how did this happen? So what I'm telling you is that there's a net value add for either party. We learn, get education, training, skills. They get to test and run their technology by some of the best companies, investors, get somebody to do business planning, due diligence for free. Okay. Don't pay them anything. Right. Smart, motivated Princeton students are doing it for free. Right. So it's a win-win. Like, who's losing? You know, that's what I'm thinking. That's how we pitched it.
And I'm sure that's why it's so successful. And so, like, the investors, if they like this project that you pitch to them, they invest money in that project, that Princeton lab or whatever, so that the lab can keep doing what it's doing, and then ultimately sell it to
they'll spin it out of the lab.
They'll spin it out.
So Princeton has a huge tech transfer office.
Okay.
They will take the technology, license it out to another new entity.
Understood.
Or to a larger pharmaceutical company or whatever. Usually these investors, and especially in biotech, what they do is it's different than tech, where tech they kind of invest directly into companies, there are biotech investors who do that,
Yeah.
but a lot of them actually create companies from scratch.
Okay.
So they will find the academic, they will find the idea and be
Mhm.
like, you got to take this out of your lab, put it in a new company. We will
Understood.
hire the management team. We will figure out who's got to run this, and we will build it completely from scratch. Like,
Beautiful.
and then that's their model. And so we hope that with this HPV technology, the company that will be started the professor will be involved. He'll be
Mhm.
on the scientific advisory board or whatever,
Got it.
but he's not going to run it day to day. Because as I
Yes.
told you, he's not a drug developer. He's an
Mhm.
academic,
Mhm.
right? But what are they going to do? They're going to go around New Jersey, go to, Merck and DMS and be like, hey, do you want to get on the spaceship? We're going up. We're building a company. People will say, yeah, I really do.
Got
And
it.
that's how it all starts.
Bro, I'm actually learning a crazy amount right now, which is what I had hoped. And so now my question is, bro, from the economic perspective, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is really no different than people going on Shark Tank and pitching their company, right? Like, why don't we see any biotech
Yeah.
companies like going up to Shark Tank, for example? Because it's the same thing, right? Like what you guys did is
Yeah.
like you could technically be the person going on Shark Tank and being like,
Yeah.
hey, Mark Cuban, like invest in this, right?
Yeah.
But why don't we see biotech sort of I haven't seen any biotech firms on that show, and I watch it a
Yeah.
ton,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, is that just because the investors are a very specific space, or do you not know the answer? I don't know if it's a dumb question.
No, I know the
but
answer to this.
okay.
This is a good point, and I think it is really good to bring up. Actually,
Okay.
I think if I go on Shark Tank,
Yeah.
and I say, Mark Cuban, here's a new basketball shoe that I've invented. It's got springs in the bottom, and it allows me to jump to 9 feet, and I can just dunk the ball in 1 second.
Yeah.
Just think, wow, I totally understand that. Okay. Now, if I go to him and say, hey, hepatitis B is a huge unmet medical need. The hepatitis B, we believe the pathogenesis is driven by this polymerase 2 enzyme.
Got it.
And in order to drug that enzyme, you have to hit this pocket. And this is how we're going to discover chemical matter. He's going to say, yeah, I don't understand that. And therefore, I'm not going to invest in it. Right. So it's driven by a small contingency of investors who themselves are doctors and PhD scientists and understand this thing forwards, backwards, sideways, right? So you, as a pitcher, as the person who's pitching, are also in the science. They are also in the science because they're due diligencing your science, right?
Yes.
And the investor community is very, very small then, because not everybody understands this stuff, right?
Yes.
I'll give you an example. Moderna was a company that was started in 2010 from an academic's lab.
2010, only 11 years
2010.
ago.
Can you believe that? It's crazy. Yeah.
The heck?
They were looking around at novel technologies coming out of MIT. This professor came up to them, this guy, Bob Langer, who's a huge guy in the field.
I've heard of him. Yeah.
And he said, hey, I have this interesting technology where you can use mRNA to create therapeutic proteins. And this venture firm said, okay, let's roll the dice. Let's see what happens. And that they have taken, that company is now Moderna.
Right.
And will transform how we make vaccines into the future.
Because we're not going back from this mRNA, I don't think.
Nah, that J&J.
60% versus 95%, right? Sheesh.
Yeah. So yeah, I think like that's how biomedical innovation happens. And
wow.
Yeah, and the vaccine race is a really good example of how this happened.
Yes. Man, dude, I have like so many things I want to ask, and I don't even know how long we've been on here, so I'm trying not to go over time, but I'm gonna keep asking questions. Hopefully.
Okay, yeah. And
bro,
then cut it however you want, like whatever you want to do with it. Yeah.
Amazing. I think my headphones said low battery earlier, so I hope they don't die, but I'm still hearing you. We're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Bro, I'm learning a ton here. So one other thing I want to tease out here is sort of like the mindset of an entrepreneur, right? And this is going back to what we're talking about earlier, is how I felt like you're a little bit of a different pre-med, because I feel like pre-med has its own challenges. There's very much like a cut and dry, like, you know, path that you follow. And you're sort of like in this lane. And
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, like, could you just talk a little bit about this mindset of like
Yeah.
being in this space, like you're pitching to these investors, you know, your students? That must have been a little bit of like, man,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm actually know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of like just putting yourself out there,
Yeah.
being comfortable, being uncomfortable type thing. I just wanted to kind of tease that out, and hear more about that from you, and then sort of like ask, what would you recommend pre-meds who have an interest in this sort of be thinking about? What sort of personal attributes do they want to cultivate? Just things like that. I know it's a lot of
Yeah.
questions there, but like,
Yeah. No, I'm happy to talk about those things. And
yeah,
um,
because it's different,
I was
right?
I
From the
was also
pre-med journey, it's
yeah,
different.
I was
Go
also
ahead.
thinking maybe like a useful experience of just putting like your major to good use and that stuff. We can talk a little bit about the vaccine stuff. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was in the trial and whatnot, so
yeah, yeah.
I can like cover some of that. It's very, very fascinating.
I saw that.
But I would say on the first thing, I'm actually very averse to the word entrepreneurship. I hardly use it. I almost I've started to try to train myself not to use it, because I think it's become a buzzword in the vernacular for people that actually is kind of meaningless. Like, like people don't, it is used so often, whether you're the person starting, Instagram, or you're the guy on TikTok who's selling, gold chains. Oh,
Right.
I'm an entrepreneur. Like it doesn't do it justice. An entrepreneur, in my mind, conjures an image of a very kind of self-possessed and like self-centered approach to building value.
Mm,
It's like we call Mark Zuckerberg a famous entrepreneur, right?
yeah.
But then it's just all about Mark, you know?
Mm,
It's not about the amazing company he's built and the amazing people who have been on that ride with him.
got it.
And maybe that's applicable in technology and in traditional technology.
Okay.
But when you're working in drug discovery and development, I'll use that as an area.
Yeah.
You're bringing value to patients. Patients are the end goal. Can you make a difference for patients? And so you assuming the role of like, I'm the entrepreneur. It's very like self-prophetic. Like you feel
Yeah.
like you're charging the hill, right? And the way where I learned that actually is through my boss, this guy Jake Van Naarden, who's class of 06.
Mhm.
He and the CEO of that company, Josh Blinker, who's class of 94, they
Wow.
sold the company that I now work for called Loxo Oncology for $8 billion. It's a huge exit. They're probably the most successful entrepreneurs ever to graduate from Princeton.
Wow.
But I asked him that question, said, do you feel like an entrepreneur? He
Mm,
said, no, that's a wrong word to be used in our world, because in the end, this is a team sport. You need a lot of people to do this, and all the voices around the table are contributing to get this drug to patient. And ultimately, it's about the patient. So it shouldn't be about me and what I did. So I've always viewed it from that lens. And I think I agree with you. The mentality can be there that you put yourself out there. You need to be able to absorb massive amount of risk. You need to be able to think in advance. You need
right.
to be able to do all of these things. But the word is something that I've started to reject. And I think that it's, it can be overplayed. I also believe that, and I'm a big believer of this, coming out of college, I remember some mentors of mine asked, like, at school, like, oh, so, when are you going to start the company? Like, are you going to go run a company now? Like, I said, no chance,
Mm,
no chance. I do not nearly know enough. And I'm not trying to be like, play some humility card or something. Literally, this is an incredibly complex industry. For the first 6 months of my job, I literally was like, what am I doing? Like, I do not understand this at all. Okay. This is a field of 20 different disciplines. And just to give you a feel of some of these disciplines,
yeah. Yeah. Please.
clinical development. How do you power a clinical trial? How do you run a clinical trial? It's crazy. You don't learn this in school,
No, not
right?
at all.
Okay, structural biology. How do I know what the protein looks like? Medicinal chemistry, regulatory affairs, chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. Um, it's like endless, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this like, what is happening here? So I have like really dug into the mindset that early in my career, and I hope this is relevant for other people.
Yeah.
We live in a world where now when you go on LinkedIn, you scroll and you see everybody's starting something or doing something, and that's great. And there's a lot of
Mhm.
like American entrepreneur
Right.
mindset, and capitalism is a strong motivator, right?
Yeah.
But you cannot downplay the benefit of getting trained well and learning like the real way of doing this properly. And so I'm committed early in my career. I want to learn. I don't want to try to be the boss. I don't want to do that. I just want to understand how to do this. And then when I'm ready to take the leap, I'll take the leap, but I'll take it on an informed basis, not
Mm.
just hazard like, okay, I'm going to just go and do it, see what happens. Because this is not, hey, I'm getting, I'm creating an app to walk your dog or whatever. It's
Right.
putting a real substance into somebody's body who's
Yes.
dying of a disease.
Yes.
And you cannot take that, you have to take it seriously.
Mhm.
And that seriousness only comes from being trained in a serious way.
Right.
So that's where I stand on that. I don't know if I've answered your question
No, you absolutely did.
accurately.
Bro, I think that's a fascinating, very nuanced take and important for people to hear. And also, it's sort of, I love what you said about not being self-centered, right?
Yeah.
Because, and I think that will be music to a lot of pre-meds ears, because we think we're like, oh, salt of the earth, like nicest
Yeah.
people on the earth. They're like, oh, we hate money and like business and
Yeah.
all that,
Yeah.
right? But you talked about the triangle, like
Yeah.
business, medicine, science, right?
Yeah.
You're just talking about using business to help other people, and it's not all about me. So that's a really wonderful idea that you just put out there,
Mhm.
that I really, really appreciate, and hope people can find some value to, as well, bro. And then maybe also like, and this goes back to why we said biotech firms aren't on Shark Tank, right?
Yeah.
It might be a little bit of a different space than the regular entrepreneur
Yeah.
space, where there's like, you don't really need that scientific basis for all those other things necessarily, right? But
Yeah.
once you get into the scientific space, might not be a good idea to start a company at age
Yeah.
22 with
Yeah.
something that you're trying to inject into people, right? So this is a great distinction for me. It's interesting for me to
Yeah.
hear about like science entrepreneurship and then non-science entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's a huge difference. And
Yeah.
I'll give you the example of like, you've heard of that company Theranos,
I
and
have not heard of
Elizabeth.
them.
What about Elizabeth Holmes? Have you heard of her?
I'm
She
not
was a
sure, bro.
Stanford dropout who wanted to. It's a huge famous story. She's like going to jail now, but
Oh
she
no.
wanted to start a diagnostics company that from a pinprick of blood, I can tell every disease that you have or had.
Oh, I may
And
have heard of
you've
that.
probably
Yeah.
heard of her. That is an example of when things go wrong,
Mm.
right? And I think there's, I'm not trying to feed into the mindset that young people can't be impactful in this industry and that the curve is not changing, because I really hope it is.
Yeah.
Like if I'm the last person at 23 who's coming right into industry, then something is wrong,
Okay.
right? But I think a lot of students, especially at schools like Princeton and maybe other places, they we feed into the idea that we need to be immediately successful.
Mm.
We need to exit and immediately, like, the world has to fall on us. It I've learned, and really valuable lessons being at my job for the past few months, that hey, like, you got to earn your stripes, and you have to learn things the hard way, and you have to put in the work, and it will come. But trust,
Yes.
as you always say, trust the process,
Right,
right?
right.
Um, so I hope like listeners understand that too, that like, nobody has an expectation that you have to walk out and the idea will land on your head and whatever.
Mhm.
Just invest in your training, be passionate about what you're doing, and you'll take it forward.
Right.
To my earlier point though, and the whole point of Olymptos was getting young people interested in this.
Yeah.
And I don't think you need to be post PhD, post MD to do something important in this industry and to even play a part.
Mm.
The industry is also growing so rapidly, especially in this past year, where
So
everybody's realized the value of what we're doing.
Yeah. Get a
Because,
vaccine in like however long it took, like 2 days. It felt like
when pharma was ranked pre-pandemic the lowest industry in American.
I wanted to ask about this too.
No, we'll talk about this too. But
Yeah.
but anyway, so what I'm saying is that the industry is growing so rapidly.
Yeah.
There are not enough people coming out of PhD and MD programs who will want to be part of this industry, or have the means to, or whatever. These companies need people who can understand science, but they don't have to understand it. Like, you don't have to publish a Nature paper to
Right.
get this stuff,
Right.
right?
Right.
So like the tech industry, what I think will happen is they will start to take people younger and younger and younger. And that right now, we have a lot of friends who came right out of school and became product managers or
Yes.
software engineers or whatever else. Why can't that happen for bio?
I love it. I love this,
Why?
dude.
Why not? Right?
Yes.
And that in the 20-year arc, I think that's what's going to happen.
Got it.
You're going to see people matriculate right out of undergrad, go to these amazing companies, get great experience, training, whatnot, and the curve will move younger and younger and younger. You won't have to have gray hair to start a biotech company.
Got it, bro.
Younger. But it all comes back to that piece of training.
Yes.
Because you do need to be trained properly to do this. Because this is no joke. It is really, it's really hard.
Yeah.
So if the training curve moves up, I think everything else will move up too.
Beautiful vision, bro. And I honestly, you said it perfectly. Nothing to add on to there. And my question was kind of rising out of one thing you said right there. What do you say? This is somebody, I'm going into the medical field, right? And my mom is also like very heavy. My dad works for a pharmaceutical company, GlaxoSmithKline as well.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But it's like interesting because my mom's like very, very anti-drugs. And so it's like very funny. It's like funny because she tries to practice. She's an MD, but she tries to like, she feels like the over antibiotics, we've all heard a million things about this, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned, Americans kind of hated pharma before all this, right?
They still do, but
they still do. Because I was thinking to myself, why are we not singing the praises of these companies that gave us this miracle vaccine in what felt like 2 weeks? What do you say, right, to me as a doctor who I feel like, I don't want to make my patients over-rely on drugs, but at the same time, it's like, what do you say to those people who criticize the big pharma industry and, what medicines should look like going forward? Because to me, it's like, man, you need medicines to cure people's, cancers that are genetic that kind of come out of nowhere. Like you obviously need medicine there, right? How do we strike that balance? What do you say on this topic? I wanted to know your thoughts on this even before the pod.
I think this is a great topic of conversation.
Good.
And I'll caveat, I have a biased viewpoint. I'm in the industry, so obviously I have an industry leaning viewpoint, but I want to be a little objective. So like, let me zoom out a little bit, right? I think in the pandemic, people have realized the value of the American research and innovation engine. There's a reason why the best vaccines that are being developed here. And I told my parents in March when we got kicked off campus that it will happen here. It will happen fast, and we will be the first beneficiaries of it.
And that's what happened.
And that's exactly what happened. And that's why I participated in the trial. Because I said, if I can be part of this, this is gonna go somewhere. And was it a risk? Yeah. There was only 30 patients worth of data before I enrolled. Because it was just the phase 1. And the phase 3 is like 40,000 people. So now we know it's safe. And everybody was like, all right, I'll get the jab. Like, whatever, I know it's safe. But I was like, all right, I'm going for it. My mom and dad were like, what are you doing? I was like, Mom and Dad, I'm 22. Like, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
So I went and did it.
Okay.
But I read the data, I read the science, I sent it to people at my company, I thought about it. I was like, okay, I think that this is sufficiently de-risked and that we can do this, right? In the pandemic, people have realized that these pharma companies did this, and they didn't have to do it, right?
Yes.
Pfizer could have just sat back, enjoyed themselves, and said, I don't want to do this hard work. Why do it? Right?
Okay.
But they did it because they have a commitment to patients and to making lives better. And although that might sound like some hokey advertising BS,
Yeah.
it's a little bit true.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So I think in that realm, people should start to realize that, wait, like these people pretty much saved us from this. And honestly, there should be a statue of Anthony Fauci built somewhere in the world, because like
Right.
he literally like hand in glove walk these pharma companies through everything, right? But I would say on the pricing thing, the main thing is I agree with you in terms of medicines that are non-innovative.
Okay.
And I
What
will
does
give
that mean? What does that
give
mean?
a fair criticism for even the parent company of Loxo, Eli Lilly,
Yeah.
which relies heavily on insulin.
Okay.
Okay. Insulin has been around since the 1960s. We know that's important for diabetics,
For diabetes.
of which there are probably almost 25 million diabetics in this country. You do not need to keep raising the price of insulin every year.
Right.
Why?
Right. That's ridiculous. Yeah.
And once it's off patent, like, why are we still raising the prices of these things? Right? Or like the EpiPen thing. Do you remember that?
Of course. Yeah. My cousins. Yeah. Yeah.
And they raised the price of the EpiPen for no reason. I agree with you 110%. Do not do that. And those people are, thugs, hustlers, and bad people, and give the industry a bad rap. But if you are discovering something novel and taking it from nothing to something, there has to be a system in our world that rewards that innovation.
Where you get paid for that. Yeah. Yeah.
Get paid for that.
It's value.
Right? Exactly. And in every other industry, you can do that.
Okay.
Coca-Cola, for example, has a patent on Coca-Cola. That patent extends forever. Forever. They will never have to ever get off patent. The only industry in which you have to get off patent is in the pharmaceutical industry. And so when the drug gets approved, to the time it gets off patent, which is maybe 10 to 15 years later, you have to recoup all the investment that you put in to get the drug.
Right.
Plus subsidizing all the failures, of which 99% of things fail.
Okay.
And make money too, right? Because you're a for-profit business. Once it goes off patent, that's it. It's over. Like,
meaning anybody can use it, generics.
Anybody can make that thing if the
Understood.
patent is not protected. But there has to be somewhere in our in our world that rewards that innovation, because if not, then who would do it? And
got it.
So what the Biden administration and Congress, a real good bipartisan issue for them is drug pricing and pushing back on that, right? And it's a convenient political thing for them to talk about.
For sure.
The drug companies, they're stealing all your money.
Yeah.
What about the PBMs? What about the insurance companies? What about the providers? What about all that?
Yeah.
Nobody's thinking about that because it's too complicated to think about all that. It's easier just to blame the drug companies,
prices,
where everybody can say, oh, I saw that Pfizer ad on TV, and they must be the worst people in the world.
Okay.
Right? I'm not absolving the industry of blame. Right. I'm not saying they don't do dishonest practices. Yeah. I agree. But we have to live in a world where innovation is rewarded. And if this legislation goes through the Biden administration, what will happen is you will see pricing pressure on these pharmaceutical companies, of which their prices will go down. Okay. They will start making less revenue. As a result, they will be less inclined to bring innovation from start to finish. Right. And less medicines will get to patients. It's a trickle-down effect that will impact the entire bioeconomy. Yeah. So we need to think critically about it.
I love it. I love this perspective, man. Keep going.
The last thing I'll say is people always make the straw man argument. Well, in Canada, insulin only costs $2.
Keep going.
And I'll say, okay, what pharmaceutical companies exist in Canada? Tell me. I don't know a single one, right? Yeah. Unfortunately, the United States, the European Union, and Japan subsidize all of pharmaceutical development in the world. unfortunately, we happen to be the economies that can sustain and pay for these innovations,
Yeah.
of which then other nations ultimately end up benefiting from.
Right.
But that's how it's happened. So until Canada or Mexico or India or any other country starts up an R&D, not just a pharmaceutical manufacturing business, R&D,
Yeah.
research and development,
Yeah.
we will never have a world in which you'll have equal pricing parity everywhere.
Right.
Americans will always have to bear the brunt of the cost.
Right.
And
Right.
I'm not acting
Okay.
like I know how to fix it. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if I keep thinking about that all the time, I can't actually bring the novel. I can't focus my time on bringing the novel medicine to patients.
Right.
And providers like you, yes, you're aboard by the prices and such, but you also want to deliver some kind of benefit to your patients.
Right.
And if you can do that with a better drug, you will, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's where I kind of stand on that issue. I hope it wasn't too biased or anything.
Bro, I mean, it doesn't matter if it's everybody's biased to some extent. I just,
Yeah.
the important thing is talking about it so that people hear it and can learn from this. Hopefully it, is a productive conversation. And so that's really interesting to me. You feel like Canada is able to have those cheap drugs because they're basically like getting the generic forms from us or the regular forms from us. And you're saying if we sort of cut this funding, I guess, for pharmaceuticals, then like it's going to trickle down to everybody else in the world, and then there's going to be a problem, essentially.
Yeah. Essentially, if we decide we don't want to pay for drugs, which I get it, it's a huge taxpayer expense, and it's not right or fair that we have to bear the brunt. But if we decide not to, there will be research and innovation will start to go down, and around the world, you will see less and less medicines be made for patients.
Right.
So, what are you going to do, right?
You're going to think about
you're going to put pricing pressure and remove R&D, or you're going to keep R&D and keep the prices. There has to be maybe some middle area, which is probably better. But I'm not the guy to figure that out.
Right.
That's what I'll tell you.
Neither am I, bro. I don't understand.
That's not me.
Yeah. Well, what is you is giving this perspective, and hopefully people find that helpful, bro. And I've learned a lot here. Yeah. So thank you for sharing all this wisdom, man.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I think we might be a little over time here, but I still want to ask the question I like to ask at the end, just like, what sort of interest do you have sort of outside of all this stuff? Anything fun you've been doing in the pandemic? I like to just like kind of ask people about, the parts of themselves that are not, their careers and their passions and whatnot. Love to hear.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I wanted to talk about that. I love, I as you know, and my friends know to death, of which they will roast me for sure for the pod and be like, you love this stuff. You keep talking about this stuff. I bore them to death, and my parents talking about this stuff. But it's I hope you can tell I'm very passionate about it. It's very core to my identity and being. But what I'll say is, outside of work and whatnot, I love to do other things. I've been painting for a long time. Since when I was like 8 years old. And I got a little bit back into it during the pandemic. And then hopefully we'll try to get back more into it. I brought all my painting supplies here. I'll show you something.
Yeah, man.
This is something I've been working on for.
Wow. Go grab it, dude. 100%.
So I've been working on this for like years.
Bro, this is unreal.
So this is still going. We'll see when it gets done. But I started it in high school, and then I went to college and kind of forgot about it. Didn't have the time, whatever. Started doing some more of it in quarantine. I used to go to art lessons, so I like talked to my art like professor or like whatever master or whatever you call them. And then she started getting me back into it, and I got all the paints and supplies and started to get back into it. I need to finish this one this year. That is my goal. Man. So I love doing that. I think what else? Just loving like being part of the city and starting to feel like it's becoming a home for me, seeing a lot of people and friends and keeping up with people. And then I think I still feel, I don't know about you, but I feel still very connected to school.
Yeah.
Like school, we didn't get the end that we deserved. We didn't get any of that. But I feel like that last quarter of the year didn't define my three and three quarters.
I love
And
that
so
perspective.
I like to, if I have time, help in any way I can. I do a lot of career chats with people there to talk about literally what I talk about today, but also just, I like helping in other ways, like through the alumni association or whatever else I can do. And it's such a, it's a wonderful place. It's like Disneyland.
Yeah.
So I feel connected to school, and I, spend some of my free time doing that. And then I think what else? Reading books, doing things, talking to people.
What kind of books you reading, Rohan?
So I picked up this book, which I think would be a good book to read, and then I'll show you another book.
For the listeners on Spotify, Rohan's showing everything. I love this. Michael Lewis.
This is a book by Michael Lewis.
The Premonition.
It's about the pandemic, actually.
Okay.
And he wrote it like mid-pandemic without like an end. So we'll see.
And it's like already published. I'm seeing all these books about the pandemic. I'm like, how do these people write these books in a few months?
But then I understand, like they're just sitting at home. They're like, of course, true. And they're like, oh, what's happening in the pandemic? Oh, let me just turn on CNN. Like, all right.
There's my writing material.
Yeah. They're like, I don't need to go into some library or something. Right. Let me just, but this is a good book that I read recently. James Joyce's Dubliners.
Okay.
And I actually really like to read nonfiction. Fiction.
Yeah.
Fiction.
Yeah.
I read a lot of nonfiction for work. I like to read nonfiction because it makes me think about like the other ways people live. It makes you think about like just like the other important things, like how people act, or psychology, romance, things like that. And so I love like good writing, and I've tried to write a little bit more in the pandemic, just like my thoughts and whatnot. But this book, James Joyce, The Dubliners, is about like daily life in Dublin. And it's a set of short stories, a very famous book.
Wow. I've heard of it for sure.
Yeah. It's one of those books that in like English classes, people don't want to read.
Yeah.
And so I was like, let me try it. I'm old enough now. Like, I think I could try it. It took me a while to read it, but I would say fiction it allows your mind to work in a different way.
Yeah, man.
Doing some of that and, keeping up with people and then everything else. It's pretty much it. I'm ready to, I don't know if this is like appropriate for your podcast, but I'm ready to rage this summer.
I know, bro.
Ready to have a good
just
time.
Like see some people and like dance and like
dance.
I miss dancing with people, dude.
My God.
Like it feels like a whole another lifetime ago the last time I like was on a dance floor. I don't even remember, bro. Like, so
for people on the listening in,
oh boy, here we go.
Lotito is an incredible dancer. The life of the party, bro.
No. I just do it. I don't know if I have any skills, guys. I don't know what's going on.
Life of the party. You don't have to be skilled to do it, especially on the cap dance floor. You did not need to be. You could just do whatever you wanted. You had to just bring the energy.
Throw the body around, hit some people, man. Share some energy. Yeah. But man, bro, dude, you're a Renaissance man doing a lot of different things. I didn't know you paint. That's wonderful. And then
getting back into it. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
I think we're all getting into these things. Like, I know you've started playing piano a lot, and I've been listening in. How's that going?
Bro, thanks for asking. It's nice. Like, sort of like you, I took piano lessons for I think like 1 year when I was a kid, and then sort of focused on basketball. It kind of became very big for me. And then my sisters played piano for so long, and now they never play. And I only played for 1 year. And so I like just got myself like an electronic keyboard, like pretty cheap, and just like to play. And I like to play my favorite movie soundtracks, and because I feel like it gives you, makes me think of the movie and stuff. So that's cool. I like to draw a lot too, bro. Just like sort of randomly, I'll be like, I want to draw this one thing. So I've just been drawing, just doing those things, right? That are sort of outside this whole other like part of me. I think is important. So
Well,
Yeah.
this was phenomenal. I knew this would be good. I'm glad we did it. I'm sorry for postponing, but and please come to New York City and we'll dance. I promise you that much. We will
Bro,
dance.
some future decade will dance, bro. Hopefully it's soon, dude. Bro,
Yeah.
this might have been my longest pod because I've like enjoyed the hell out of it, man. Thank you for taking your time, bro.
Of course,
And
yeah.
for the listeners, thank you for listening. If you made it this far, you're a real one. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk
Thank
soon.
you. Bye.
Peace.